I'm calling my father. Is that you calling this late? No, son. It's me. Something's wrong with your mother. But before I could say another word, before I could tell him what the specialist had just whispered to me in that parking garage, the line went dead in my hand, and headlights swung into my driveway. My name is Walter Boone. I'm 66 years old, a retired Army logistics officer, and for 31 years I moved equipment and supplies across half the world without ever losing a single shipment. I built my career on one simple rule: trust nothing you haven't verified yourself. I forgot that rule the day my wife started forgetting hers. Before I go any further, I want to say hello to whoever's listening tonight. Tell me in the comments where you're tuned in from. It does an old soldier good to picture a face out there in the dark, some kitchen table or truck cab where my voice is keeping you company. And if you've ever had to fight for someone you love against people wearing the family name, hit that like button, subscribe, so you don't miss what happens next. It started 8 months ago, on a Tuesday, the kind of gray November Tuesday where nothing is supposed to happen. My wife Carol was 63, a retired elementary school music teacher, the kind of woman who still hummed hymns while she watered her tomato plants. We'd been married 39 years. I knew the sound of her footsteps on the stairs the way other men know their own heartbeat. That Tuesday, she forgot the recipe for the cornbread she'd made every Sunday since Nixon was president. She stood in the kitchen holding the measuring cup, staring at it like it was a foreign object, and she looked at me and said, "Walter, what do I do with this?" I laughed it off, told her she was tired, but 3 days later she forgot our granddaughter's name, and 2 weeks after that, she forgot how to find her way home from the church that was 4 blocks from our house. A patrol officer found her sitting on a bus stop bench in the rain, her cardigan soaked through, telling him she was waiting for a man named Walter who was late picking her up. I was standing right there in our kitchen when he brought her home. Our son Marcus came the next morning. Marcus is 38, and he'd made a small fortune in commercial real estate down in Charlotte, the kind of money that lets a man wear a watch that costs more than my first truck. He hugged me in the driveway, and he cried real tears, and he said, "Dad, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Let me handle it. Let me take care of Mom the way she took care of us." God help me. I believed every word. Within a month, Marcus had hired a specialist, a private neurologist named Dr. Adaiz Nwosu, who ran a small independent practice 2 counties over instead of the university hospital where Carol's regular doctor worked. Marcus said the university had a 6-month waiting list, and Carol didn't have 6 months to lose. He said he'd already paid for the first year of treatment out of his own pocket, some kind of intensive cognitive stabilization program. He showed me brochures with soft blue lettering and photos of silver-haired couples walking through gardens. I remember thinking, thank God for this boy. Thank God I raised a son who runs toward trouble instead of away from it. Marcus moved into our guest room, just for a few months, to help. His wife Renata came with him, a sharp, polished woman who'd been a pharmaceutical sales rep before she married into real estate money. Renata took over Carol's medication schedule with the brisk efficiency of someone running a small hospital wing. Pill organizers labeled by day, a locked cabinet in the laundry room, a whiteboard on the refrigerator tracking Carol's episodes, her tremors, her confusion, her long, silent stretches staring at the television without seeing it. I watched my wife disappear in pieces over the following months. Not all at once, that would have been almost merciful. She disappeared the way a coastline disappears to a rising tide, 1 inch at a time. So slow you keep telling yourself the water hasn't really moved. Yesterday, Marcus finally took us to Dr. Nwosu's office for what he called a quarterly progress review. I sat in the waiting room while Marcus went in first, alone, to brief the doctor on recent changes, he said, before I brought Carol back. I didn't think anything of it. He'd been doing that every visit for months. I sat there under the fluorescent lights, flipping through a hunting magazine I wasn't reading, and when the nurse finally called me back, Marcus was already gone. Off in the parking lot taking a business call, he said, something about a closing that couldn't wait. I wheeled Carol into the office alone. Dr. Nwosu was a tall woman in her 40s with tired, careful eyes. She examined Carol's chart, checked her pupils with a small light, asked her gentle questions Carol couldn't answer, and then she did something strange. She stood up, walked to the office door, and quietly turned the lock. She came back, crouched down beside my wheelchair-bound wife, and looked at me with an expression I will carry to my grave. "Mr. Boone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not react. Do not let your son know we had this conversation. Whatever he tells you tonight, do not let him bring your wife back to this clinic, and do not let him be alone with her again." I opened my mouth to ask her what in God's name she meant, and that's when I heard the door handle rattle behind me. I am 66 years old. I spent 3 decades learning to keep my face perfectly still while the ground shifted under my boots, and I have never in my life needed that skill more than I needed it in that half a second, turning around to see my son standing in the doorway, smiling at me, asking how the appointment went. "Doctor," Nwosu straightened up so fast it looked natural, like she'd simply been adjusting Carol's blanket. She smiled at Marcus, told him everything looked stable, scheduled the next visit for 6 weeks out, and shook his hand like nothing in the world had happened. I said nothing the whole ride home. I sat in the back of Marcus's German SUV next to Carol, holding her limp hand, staring at the back of my son's head, replaying the doctor's words like a tape stuck on loop. Do not let him be alone with her again. Renata called Marcus's phone through the car speakers halfway home, wanting an update, and I listened to my son lie to his own wife with the smooth, practiced ease of a man reading off cue cards. "Mom's doing great, babe. Doctor." Nwosu's happy with the numbers. "We're keeping her stable." Stable. That word again. Like Carol was a building he was shoring up, not a woman he was supposed to love. That night, after Marcus and Renata retired to the guest room, I lay awake beside my wife's hospital bed, which we'd set up in what used to be my den, listening to the house tick and settle. I've slept in barracks in 4 countries. I know the particular silence of a house where someone is lying awake in another room, pretending to sleep. I could feel Marcus awake down the hall the same way I used to feel an ambush coming before I heard the first shot. Around 1 in the morning, I heard him, soft footsteps on the hallway runner, the careful, deliberate gait of a man who knows exactly which boards creak. I lay still, watching through the crack of the door, and I saw him pass by carrying something small and dark, cradled in both hands like it was precious. He went into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open. I heard a distinctive metallic click, one I recognized instantly from 30 years of securing supply depots, a combination lock snapping shut. I waited until his footsteps retreated back down the hall before I got up. In the kitchen, in the back of our second refrigerator, the one we kept in the mudroom for overflow groceries, there was now a small black lockbox bolted to the interior shelf with steel brackets. Bolted into my refrigerator. My son had installed hardware into my house without asking me to secure something he didn't want me or anyone to find. I am a logistics officer. For 3 decades, my entire professional life was built on one discipline: knowing where every single item is, at every single moment, and who has access to it. A man doesn't bolt a locked box into a refrigerator to protect vitamins. He does it to control something dangerous and to make absolutely certain no one else can get to it. I went back to bed, but I did not sleep. I lay there next to Carol's shallow breathing, running the math the way I used to run supply manifests. 8 months since her memory started slipping. 8 months since Marcus swept in with a private doctor nobody had ever heard of, a locked medication cabinet, a whiteboard tracking her decline like a project timeline. 8 months since my sharp, funny, occasionally fierce wife of 39 years became this silent shell in a wheelchair, and my son became a man I was starting not to recognize. The next morning I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called my old army buddy, Ray Delgado, who'd left the service to run a private toxicology lab outside Raleigh, the kind of place attorneys hire when a case needs answers a hospital lab won't give fast or quiet. I told him I needed a favor, and I told him not to ask why yet. That afternoon, while Marcus was at his downtown office and Renata had taken Carol's caregiver's day off to run errands, I picked the lock on that box in 11 minutes. Old skills don't rust the way people think they do. Inside, I found 6 unlabeled amber vials of a clear liquid, a insulin syringe kit that had no business being anywhere near a woman with no diabetes diagnosis, and a spiral notebook filled with Marcus's cramped handwriting dosages, times, and a phrase repeated at the top of every single page that made my blood run cold in my own veins. Do not exceed. Do not let Dad see. I photographed every page. I drew 3 milliliters from one vial into a clean syringe I bought at the pharmacy under a fake prescription number I still remembered from my supply days, sealed it, and drove it myself to Ray's lab 2 hours away, telling Marcus I needed to visit my brother in Fayetteville. I did not tell my son the truth. I have not told my son the truth about anything since that night, and God forgive me. Some part of me hopes he never learns how much of an actor his own father turned out to be. Ray called me 48 hours later, and his voice sounded like a man reading a casualty report. "Walter, sit down." I told him I was already sitting. "This isn't a cognitive stabilization compound. There's no such medication on any FDA formulary matching this composition. What you sent me is a custom mixed cocktail, a heavy sedative, a beta blocker at nearly triple the safe cardiac dosage, and trace lithium salts. Walter, this combination doesn't treat memory loss. It manufactures it. Given daily, at these doses, it would produce exactly what you're describing: confusion, disorientation, tremors. It would make a perfectly healthy woman look like she was sliding into late-stage dementia, and it would do it slowly enough that no doctor doing a routine exam would catch it, especially not a doctor your son is personally paying." I asked him the question I already knew the answer to. I asked him if it could kill her. "At these cardiac dosages, sustained over time?" "Yes, Walter. Eventually, yes. It would look like her heart simply gave out under the strain of advanced dementia. Nobody would order a toxicology screen on a woman everyone already believed was dying of natural causes. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a gas station 40 minutes from my own house, and I did not cry. Not yet. I felt something colder than grief settle into my chest, something I recognized from 30 years ago, the feeling of a convoy commander realizing the ambush wasn't a possibility anymore. It was already happening, and the only question left was whether you'd see it coming in time to save your people. My wife wasn't losing her mind. My son was stealing it from her, one careful dose at a time, and I had let him walk into our home and do it because he cried real tears in my driveway and called me Dad. I drove home and I did not confront him. 30 years of logistics work teaches you that the worst thing you can do when you discover a breach is announce it before you understand its full size. I needed to know why. Marcus had money. Marcus had success. Marcus had, as far as I knew, no reason on God's earth to poison his own mother. So I started watching, the way I used to watch a compromised supply line, quietly, patiently, gathering everything before I moved. I began going through the mail before Marcus collected it each morning, an old habit from managing a household of soldiers who sometimes didn't want certain letters seen. Most of it was ordinary, but buried in a stack of catalogs 3 weeks later, I found an envelope from a title company in Charlotte, addressed to Carol Boone, care of Marcus Boone as power of attorney. I hadn't signed any power of attorney. Carol certainly hadn't, not in any state of mind to understand what she was signing. Inside was a notice confirming the finalized sale of a rental property Carol had inherited from her late sister 12 years ago. A small duplex in Wilmington that generated modest but steady income that had always gone directly into Carol's personal account, separate from our joint finances, the one thing that was entirely hers. The sale price was $340,000. The proceeds had been wired, per instructions on file, to an account belonging to something called Boone Coastal Holdings LLC. I had never heard of Boone Coastal Holdings LLC in 39 years of marriage. I drove to the county records office the next day, told the clerk I was helping settle some family paperwork, and requested the filing documents. Boone Coastal Holdings LLC had been registered 14 months earlier. Its sole listed officer was Marcus Boone. 14 months earlier was 4 months before Carol's first symptom, before the cornbread recipe, before the bus stop in the rain. He hadn't started poisoning her because she was declining. She started declining because he'd already decided to poison her, and he'd built the company to catch the money 4 months before he ever gave her the first dose. I sat in my truck outside that records office, and I finally let myself feel the full weight of it, the way you let yourself feel a wound only after you've gotten your men to cover. My son hadn't panicked into a desperate act. He had planned this. He had built a legal shell company, hired a compromised doctor, and manufactured his own mother's decline as a business plan. And every single time he hugged me in that driveway and called me Dad, he already knew exactly what he was going to do to her. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the power of attorney document he'd shown me, the one for Carol. I remembered signing something myself, back when Carol's confusion first started getting bad, something Marcus had handed me at the kitchen table, saying it was just a routine caregiver authorization so he could take her to appointments without me present, standard paperwork, nothing to worry about. Dad, you're exhausted. Let me carry some of this. I'd signed without my reading glasses, trusting the boy I raised more than I trusted my own caution. I dug through the file box in my closet until 3 in the morning and found my copy. It wasn't a caregiver authorization. It was a full medical and financial power of attorney, granting Marcus complete authority over both our finances, If I were ever deemed temporarily incapacitated by grief or stress, a clause certified by a notary I'd never met, dated the same week as Carol's diagnosis. He hadn't just built a trap for his mother. He'd built one for me too, one that only sprang shut the moment I looked incapable of stopping him. I understood then that I was not dealing with a desperate man making a terrible mistake. I was dealing with an enemy who had done reconnaissance on his own family for over a year, and I had exactly one advantage he didn't know I possessed. I had spent 30 years learning how to move against an adversary without them ever seeing me coming. The next few days I played my role better than I have ever played anything in my life. I thanked Marcus for handling Carol's care. I told him I didn't know what we'd do without him. I let Renata reorganize my kitchen cabinets, and I said not one word when I noticed the pill organizer had been quietly refilled with 3 new amber vials. But every afternoon, while they believed I was napping, I was working. I photographed the LLC documents. I got a sworn, notarized statement from Ray about the toxicology results, and Ray, God bless that man, agreed to testify if it ever came to that. I called an elder law attorney 2 towns over, a woman named Patricia Yun, who'd handled a case almost identical to mine 11 years back, and she walked me through exactly how to file an emergency guardianship petition and a fraud complaint simultaneously, so that the moment I moved, Marcus would lose both access to Carol and access to any remaining money before he could react. The one piece I still needed was Carol herself. I needed her, even for a single lucid moment, to confirm what was happening to her, because a judge would want more than a grieving husband's word against a successful son's reputation. It came on a Thursday evening, 9 days after that whispered warning in the doctor's office. Marcus and Renata had gone to a dinner event downtown. The caregiver had left for the night. I sat beside Carol's bed, holding her hand the way I'd held it every night since this began, and for reasons I will never fully understand. In the amber evening light through the window, something in her eyes cleared. She turned her head and looked directly at me, really looked at me, for the first time in weeks. "Walter," she said, her voice thin but unmistakably her own. "The tea. Don't let him make the tea." I asked her what she meant, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone trying to record her. "Every night," she whispered, fighting for each word like she was dragging them up from underwater. "Marcus brings the tea, says it helps me sleep. I don't want the tea, Walter. Please, don't let him make the tea." And then, as quickly as it had surfaced, the clarity slipped back beneath the water, and she was gone again, staring past me at nothing. But I had it. 14 seconds of video, time-stamped. Her own voice naming the exact delivery method Ray had already confirmed in the lab. It was enough. It had to be enough. I called Patricia Yun that night. We filed the emergency petition first thing the next morning, before Marcus was even awake, along with a formal request that local police execute a welfare check and evidence seizure based on suspected elder abuse and attempted homicide by poisoning. I sat in my truck outside the courthouse while Patricia walked the paperwork through, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 8 months. Not hope, exactly. Something harder and more useful than hope. Certainty. I drove home ahead of the deputies to make sure Carol was safe, and to make sure Marcus didn't get so much as a phone call's warning. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, holding the black lockbox, the one I'd resealed so carefully after photographing everything inside it. His face was gray. Renata stood behind him, arms crossed, her expression twisting from irritation to something sharper when she saw my eyes. "Dad," Marcus said, setting the box down slowly. "What's going on? Why do you look like that?" "I know about the tea, Marcus," I said. I didn't raise my voice. 30 years of command teaches you the quietest voice in the room is always the one that lands hardest. "I know about Boone Coastal Holdings. I know about Dr. Nuasu, and I know she came to me 9 days ago and told me to keep you away from your own mother." The color drained out of him so fast I actually thought for one strange second that he might collapse. Renata's arms uncrossed. Her mouth opened, and what came out wasn't denial, it was fury, aimed sideways at her husband. "You told me this was handled," she hissed at him. "You told me nobody would ever look at the LLC. So there it was. She'd known. Maybe not from the beginning, but she'd known. And she'd chosen the money over a dying woman she'd called Mom at every family dinner for 6 years. Marcus turned back to me, and for one moment, just one, I saw something almost like the boy I'd raised flicker behind his eyes, something that might have been shame. Then it hardened over, the way ice forms fast on standing water in a sudden freeze. "You don't understand what I was carrying, Dad," he said, and his voice cracked in a way that made my chest ache even then, even knowing everything I knew. The real estate deals collapsed 2 years ago. I was bleeding money I couldn't tell you about. I couldn't tell anyone about. And then Mom got sick, and I saw a way to— He stopped himself, but I'd already heard enough. He saw a way. He saw his mother's mind as an opportunity. You saw a way to steal from a woman who used to sing you to sleep, I said. You saw a way to poison your own mother and let me watch her disappear thinking it was God's cruelty instead of your greed. That's when I heard the cars in the driveway. 2 county sheriff's vehicles and Patricia Yun's silver sedan right behind them. Marcus's eyes went to the window, and whatever fight had been building in him collapsed all at once, the way a building does when you cut the right support beam, fast and total and almost silent. He didn't run. I want that recorded somewhere, that in the end, my son didn't run. He sat down heavily at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd once done his 4th grade homework, and he put his face in his hands, and I honestly do not know to this day whether the sounds coming out of him were real grief or simply the sound of a plan finally, completely failing. The deputies were gentle with him, more gentle than I think I could have managed to be if our roles were reversed. Renata screamed about lawyers and about her own innocence, right up until they read her the same rights they read him, because Patricia had already made sure the fraud complaint named her too, given the sales rep pharmaceutical training that Ray's report suggested had helped calculate those exact, careful, almost survivable dosages. The following months were the hardest of my entire life, harder than any deployment, harder than any funeral I've stood through in dress uniform. Carol had to be weaned off the sedative cocktail slowly, under close medical supervision, because Ray warned me that stopping too fast could be as dangerous as the poisoning itself. There were weeks where I sat beside her hospital bed not knowing if the woman I loved was still in there at all, or if Marcus had already taken too much, too permanently. The trial took 11 months. Marcus eventually pleaded to attempted second-degree homicide by poison and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and the judge, unmoved by his attorney's talk of financial desperation and moral confusion, gave him 22 years. Renata took 14 for conspiracy. Dr. Nwosu, it turned out, had been quietly gathering her own evidence the entire time, terrified of Marcus, but more terrified of what her silence would make her complicit in. She cooperated fully with prosecutors and kept her license, though I understand she left that practice for good and now works exclusively in a hospital system, surrounded by colleagues who can watch each other's work. I sold the house last spring. Too many rooms held the sound of that combination lock clicking shut in the dark. Carol and I found a smaller place near the coast in a town where the mornings smell like salt instead of asphalt. Close enough to Patricia's old case, close enough to Ray, far enough from anyone who ever called Marcus a rising star in Charlotte real estate. This morning I brought Carol her coffee the way I have every morning for 40 years. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, stirred 9 times, because she always said 8 wasn't enough and 10 was excessive, and there is nothing in between that satisfies her. She was sitting in the wicker chair by the window, sunlight across her lap, and her color has come back now, months clean of anything but the medications an honest doctor prescribes. Her eyes met mine when I walked in, clear all the way through, sharp the way they were the day I met her at a church picnic 39 years ago. She took the cup, wrapped both hands around it, and took a slow sip, and she looked up at me with that same teasing light she's had since 1987. "Walter," she said, "you're going heavy on the sugar again." I sat down on the floor beside her chair, an old soldier with bad knees who didn't care one bit, and I put my head against her arm, and I let myself cry the way I hadn't let myself cry through any of it. Not the lab results, not the courtroom, not even the night she named the tea. These were not the tears of a broken man anymore. These were the tears of one who fought the longest campaign of his life and, against every reasonable expectation, brought his soldier home. I lost a son. I will grieve that particular death for the rest of my use, the boy on the tricycle in our old driveway, the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during Sunday sermons. That boy is gone, and I don't believe he's coming back from wherever he went. Not in 22 years, maybe not ever. But I kept my wife. Every single morning she remembers my name as a victory nobody can ever take from either one of us again. And some victories, the hardest won ones, are worth every single thing they cost you to bring home.